Part 5. He might have been a movie celebrity. He could never take a few steps in the road without people gaping and pointing at him.
It was now necessary for him to have a car, for it became a nuisance to walk in the roads. All sorts of people saluted him respectfully and stood aside while he passed. It made him feel very awkward.
All sorts of people tried to make friends with him. All sorts of people tried to waylay him and explain their difficulties. One wanted help to get a daughter married, another to send his son to Madras for higher medical studies, a third applied for help to extricate his lands, or to buy rice for the next meal, and so on and so forth.
In addition to this, public bodies seemed to have suddenly become aware of his existence. A flood relief fund here, a Gandhi fund there, earthquake relief for a far-off country, prevention of cruelty to animals, promotion of child welfare, education, and the war fund. The most constant demand was from the war fund of the local district authorities. People called on him at all sorts of places and all sorts of hours, in the street, at home, or in his office.
Quite a flood of visitors waited for him. All applications for charity instead of rousing pity only angered Margaya. What do they take me for? A magic pot? I work hard and wear myself out not in order to give gifts but to keep.
Who came to my help in those days when I was in difficulties? He had to barricade himself at home and in his office. At his office he had to move out of his original place and take another room and shut himself in.
He left the disposal of his visitors and applicants to Dr. Pal, who just told people, "This is only a bank, not a charity home," and sent away whoever came for cash. He was tactful where it was necessary, and diplomatic or downright rude where it was necessary. Sometimes he was visited by high government officials who asked, "Well, what is your contribution to the war fund?"
Dr. Pal said, "Our boss is a convinced congressman. We don't believe that this is our war. Unless the Congress High Command orders him to pay, he will never give a pie. He is a man of strict principles. Why should we contribute for a fund with which the British and US fight their enemy, not our enemy? Our enemy is Britain, not Germany.
When the Congress commands us to gather funds for fighting this enemy, you will see Margaya placing his entire wealth at the disposal of the country." Or he said, "Governor's War Fund. Nothing doing."
Sir, somebody or other they've sent from England as our governor pockets half the war fund he collects, isn't it a fact? If he takes 20,000 in cash for the war fund, he takes a similar sum in kind, in the shape of a casket or something, for domestic consumption. Can you disprove it?
Till you can do that, you cannot expect Mr. Margaya to contribute anything. He is a man of strict principles. Or if it was a highly placed police or income tax official who was making the request, Dr. Pal said, "Margaya has been thinking over it.
You may rest assured he will send in his contribution very soon." And he advised Margaya to send off a check. It will not do at all to get into disfavor with these folk, after all they will be using the money for defeating the Nazis.
He also told Margaya, "You must have a car. You simply should not be seen in the streets anymore. You have passed that stage. If you like a walk, go along the river, but don't walk in the streets."
Margaya allowed the other to buy a car for him. It was necessary for him to use a car also for another reason. At the end of a day, Margaya carried a huge bag of cash. Notes of all denominations were in the old mail sack which he had picked up at an auction. "Very good material," said Margaya of the sack, which came near bursting when Margaya closed for the day.
He now worked far into the night with the aid of kerosene lamps. The moment he reached home, he counted the notes again, bundled them up in tidy little batches, the lovely 5 rupee and 10 rupee and the most handsome piece of paper, the green 100 rupee note. He counted his cash over and over again, and locked it up in his safe and shut the door.
It would be nearly midnight when he finished the counting and rose to have his dinner. His wife waited for him patiently and sat down for food after he had had his dinner. He hardly noticed that she waited for him. His mind was fully occupied with various calculations.
He hardly spoke during the dinner. If she asked, "Shall I serve?" he merely answered back without looking up, "Don't bother me."
Do what you please, only don't bother me. He ate very little, just the quantity that a boy of 10 would eat. It worried her secretly.
She tried to improve it by putting more rice and stuff on his plate, but he just pushed it all aside, got up, and went back to work by the lamp, for further additions. She never knew when he went to bed, because even after she had finished all her work and gone to bed, she still saw him bent over his registers. She saw him with a drawn look and felt moved to say, "Shouldn't you mind your health?"
What's wrong with me? I'm all right. If you feel you need anything, go ahead and buy it and do what you like.
Take any money you want. Only leave me alone. She felt it would be best to leave him alone.
He seemed to have so little time left for rest that she concluded it would be better not to encroach upon it with her own comments. Balu has only taken after his father, his sullenness and silence, she concluded. It became a household where perfect silence reigned.
She was only secretly worried over his thin appearance and the dull weariness about his eyes. She often wanted to ask him, "Why should you work so hard? Haven't we enough?
And what are you aiming at?" But refrained from uttering it. She knew it would only annoy him.
Perfect silence reigned in the house. In the course of time, at the end of a day he brought home not one bag, but quite a number of them. It was no longer possible to count the currency notes individually.
He could only count and check up the bundles, and even that took him beyond midnight. For now his fame had spread far and wide, and it was not only the deposits of well-to-do people that arrived at his counter, but also those of smaller tradesmen and clerks and workers, who brought in their life savings. "If I have 100 rupees, better hand it to Margaya, for he will give me 20 rupees per month for a lifetime.
He is our savior." Margaya accepted any deposit that came to him, however small it might be. He explained, "I like to make no difference between rich and poor in this business, which exists after all for serving society.
We should not make distinctions." "I heard," said Pal, "they are thinking of conferring on you a title for your services." Margaya was really alarmed to hear it. What for?
For doing the greatest public service. If you only found the time to go round and see the number of people who are happy and secure through your help. There is a talk in government circles of giving you at least a public service medal. In his home the large safe was filled up, and its door had to be forced in, and then the cupboards, the benches and tables, the space under the cot, and the corners.
His wife could hardly pass into the small room to pick up a sari or towel. There were currency bundles stacked up a foot high all over the floor. Presently Margaya ordered her to transfer trunks and effects to the room upstairs. She patiently obeyed him.
Very soon this room had also to be requisitioned. More sacks emptied themselves into the house every day. "They have carried in 5 sacks today," said his brother in the next house. "Do you really say all that is money?" asked his wife excitedly.
And then they heard Margaya going upstairs and a kerosene light burned far into the night. His brother's family would have given anything to know what Margaya was doing up there so late. His brother's wife strained her ears against a small crack in the wall and heard Margaya say to his wife, "You will have to clear out of the upstairs room too."
"Where shall I put my trunk?" "Keep it in the storeroom for the present." "Is it a safe place?"
"I have some gold jewelry." "Oh, there are more valuable things for me to keep in the rooms." "Don't make a fuss."
"All right," she said docilely. "Only till I build a vault somewhere," he said, feeling that he ought to be a little more mollifying. "I must have a strong room built somewhere. I wish I could find the time to attend to it."
It was about 7 in the evening. The lights had not been lit yet. Margaya's eyes pained him and he felt weak and weary.
He had been skipping his morning food these days because he had lost the taste for it. He drank a cup of diluted buttermilk, kept himself on a few cups of coffee throughout the day and had his food only at night after closing his cash. With work ahead, I have no patience for food. He went to his office almost as soon as he got up from bed. He washed and changed and rushed off, and returned home at indefinite hours.
He said to his wife, "Opening the office is in my hands, but the closing is in the hands of other people." He had to cut out even his snuff, the one thing he liked and still enjoyed. Dr. Subbu of the Reliance Medical Hall, one of his investors, advised Margaya to give up snuff.
He consulted him with regard to a persistent pain at the back of his head, which kept him sleepless at night. The doctor examined him when he came over to collect his interest. He said, "Probably your snuff irritates the optic nerves."
"Why don't you stop snuff? Anyway, come over to my clinic for a thorough examination. We want to see you kept in the fittest condition possible, you know." He
laughed like many other doctors of his kind at his own joke. Margaya gave up snuff with a resolute will, and felt better for it. It was not quite so easy to give it up, but he said to himself, if I do not sleep at night properly, I might mess up my calculations.
And then God knows what will happen. He had mitigated his headache, but a sort of dizziness perpetually hung about his head. Dr. Subbu said when he visited him next, why don't you take a holiday at Kodaikanal Hills?
It'll do you good. Can't you afford a holiday? Margaya shook his head sadly. Not possible in this life.
I'm tied up too much with various things. He figured himself as being in the center of a tangled skein. If I move even slightly, he began, but merely said, I cannot afford to move even slightly this way or that. His accountant, Shastri, was bundling up currency, stuffing it into mail sacks, and preparing statements.
All his customers had left. Margaya felt ill. He sat in his room with his head resting on his arms.
He called out, Shastri, hurry up with your stuff. Yes, sir, said Shastri from his corner. Your son is here to see you, sir.
The door opened and Balu entered and took his seat opposite to him. Balu, come in, Margaya said, feeling happy at the sight of his son. It must be more than 2 weeks since I saw you.
How is your family? Baby has some stomach trouble and is crying. Must be teething, I suppose.
Take your mother there and show her the child. She will be able to do something. She understands these things better. You never come to our house.
I took Brind to see mother today. Oh, that's good. Otherwise, I wish I could go over to your house.
Well, I suppose when the pressure here lessens, I suppose I shall. I am virtually a prisoner here. Your cook is all right, I suppose. Yes, but he is sometimes very impertinent.
I want to send him away, but Brind is too patient. She spoils him. Don't quarrel with her.
Leave these things to her. She is right. Now the common topics of conversation seem to be over.
There was a moment's silence. Balu sat moving a pebble on Margaya's desk as a paperweight. Why don't you buy a better paperweight and a good table and chair instead of squatting like this on the ground, father? Asked Balu.
He merely replied, I don't need all those luxuries. He locked up his desk and made preparations to start out, calling, Shastri, is the statement ready? Almost, sir, replied Shastri, giving his customary reply.
I want to talk to you seriously, father, said Balu nervously. Margaya looked at his face apprehensively before saying, I am not quite well today. Tomorrow I will come to your house.
No, I must speak to you now. You have got to listen to me, said Balu authoritatively. Oh, said Margaya.
Wait a minute then. He quickly passed out of the room, went over to Shastri and whispered, don't bring in the cash bags yet, returned to his seat, and settled down. He sat looking at his son fixedly, without saying anything.
The boy sat biting his nails for a moment. He did not know how to begin. His voice shook as he said, Father, I want more money.
Oh, Margaya said, with a feeling of relief. I thought as much.
Why do you hesitate? How much do you want? The boy felt encouraged by his kindness.
He brightened up. Still he felt hesitant to answer the question. The father encouraged him, Come on, Balu, speak boldly.
I always like a fellow who talks freely and openly and boldly. Have I refused you anything so far? The boy preferred to ignore this question. I want to ask you something. I want more money.
That is all right, replied Margaya irritably. I've told you I'll give it you. How much do you want?
It depends. It depends on what you have. I have no idea what you have. How can I say?
What do you mean? I do not understand you, said Margaya, feeling puzzled. If you cannot talk clearly, you had better see me again some other time.
I am not quite well, he said sharply. He liked to have things clear-cut as in interest calculations. Vague indefinite talk annoyed him. He got up saying, I wish to go home and lie down.
Come with me if you like. No, can't talk to you there. Mother will be there.
I don't like to talk before her. Margaya called out, Shastri, get the car ready, and made a move towards the door. The boy sprang up and blocked the door, with arms spread out.
You must let me talk to you and not go. Margaya did not like scenes in his office. He threw a look at Shastri, but he was engrossed in his accounts.
Margaya went back to his seat calmly and sat down. He was completely bewildered. This was the first time he found his son so talkative. It was a revelation to him.
The boy, though not docile, was always taciturn and quiet and never so aggressive. He asked for money, which was granted, and yet what happened? He had said, "It depends on how much you have."
Margaya could hardly believe his ears. He sat in his seat and patiently waited. He felt weak and fatigued.
He wanted so much to lie down. Margaya struck a match and lit the dim kerosene lamp. He resigned himself to whatever might be coming.
The boy said, "I want to speak to you about something very serious." Margaya suppressed the annoyance that was coming over him. He felt afraid to be angry.
Probably his son had taken to drinking. He sniffed the air to find if it was confirmed by his breath. He found himself clutching the ruler on his table, but relaxed his hold at the thought, after all it's Balu, it seemed to be an unworthy move to make. He let go his hold on the ruler and waited.
The boy still would not open his lips. Margaya felt exasperated. He pulled out his watch and said, "It's about 7 o'clock.
If you do not speak before the clock hand points to 7:05, I will go. I will knock you down and walk out if necessary." He felt relieved after delivering this threat.
He felt his authority re-established. The boy cannot have it all his own way, he told himself. He placed the watch on his desk dramatically, turning it towards Balu. Balu fidgeted for a moment with his eyes fixed on the clock and then said, "I want a share of property, my share of property."
"What property?" asked Margaya. "Well, I mean, my share of property, our ancestral property." I see."
"Why? Why do you want it?" "Because I have attained my majority."
"You know it as well as I do. I am 19 and entitled to my own share of property." "What property?" asked Margaya.
"Ancestral property," the boy answered. At this, Margaya put his hand into his pocket, brought out a half-rupee coin, placed it on the table, pushed it over, and said, "There it is, take it. That's exactly half of what your grandfather left in cash. Take it and give me a receipt." The boy picked it up and looked at it. "Is this all the movable and immovable property?"
"What movable and immovable property? Movable?" Margaya lost his temper on hearing it, lost his head completely. "Movable. Immovable.
"You want me to give you a list, is that it?" "Here it is. This is what it was. Listen." And he described in coarse terms the movable and immovable properties possessed by his worthy ancestors. He was filled with chagrin at the memory of the travails he had gone through with his brother before the partition of their single house. The trip to the courts, the hours of waiting on the old lawyer's bench, the court commission visiting their house, and so on and so forth.
He remembered how miserable he had felt, wondering where his wife was going to cook the next meal and where they were to put the youngster down to sleep, while the legal proceedings were going on and they hung on to his brother's house uncertainly. Those miseries could not be understood by the boy even if explained to him. He felt sorry.
He said softly, "Boy, let us go home now and discuss it. It's all right. This is not the right time to talk of all those things."
"No," said the boy. "Don't try to dodge me. Where did you pick up all this language?"
"I'm old enough to know the world," retorted the boy. "If you don't give me an immediate account, I will go to court." "Very well. Go ahead. I have nothing more to say."
Margaya got up and tried to move out. The boy once again sprang up, spread out his arms and blocked the door. Margaya slapped his face, crying, "Get out of the way, you swine."
The boy burst into tears and sobbed. Margaya looked at his face and was moved. There were tears in his eyes too.
He put his arm around the boy and said, "You are being misled by someone, probably a lawyer, who wants an occupation. Don't listen to such people. Here I am, your father, ready to do anything for you. Only ask what you want."
"I want a share of your property." "Idiot. What obstinacy is this?"
"What property is there? I know how much you have made. I am entitled to half of it."
"How do you make that out?" "Because it is multiplied out of grandfather's property and I am entitled to half by right. I have given you a house to live in. I give you 300 rupees a month for your expenditure."
"Well, if you want, ask for some more. I will probably increase it to 400. The boy shook his head. "I want nothing of it."
I want my share. And why? Asked Margaya. I want to buy. He stopped short, changed his mind and merely said, I want it for various things.
Margaya said in a mollifying manner, all that I have is yours, my boy. Everything that I have will come to you. Who else is there? To whom can I pass these on after my time?
After your time? When is that? Are you asking when I am going to die?
The boy looked abashed. I am not saying that, but I cannot wait. I want my share urgently. Pray, what is the urgency, may I ask? Said Margaya cynically.
Do you think that I ought to drink poison and clear the way for your enjoyment? The boy did not know how to answer. Margaya could no longer keep standing.
He pushed the boy aside and walked out. He told the accountant, put the bags and the statement into the car. He got into the car and drove off, leaving his son standing on the steps of the bank.
Margaya felt restless. After closing his accounts, putting away the cash, and bolting down his food, he told his wife, I am going out for a moment. Close the door.
At this hour? She asked, but he had gone. She turned in with resignation.
His driver had locked the car and gone home. Outside, the stars were sparkling in the sky, and the streets were deserted and silent. Margaya had to walk the entire way. It was some months since he had walked, and he felt exhilarated by the exercise today.
I have perhaps been too severe, he told himself. I must investigate what his troubles are more sympathetically. Probably he is genuinely hard up.
Perhaps I might take him into business and see that he has a better income and standing. He wondered if the boy would be surprised to see him there at that hour. This is the only time I can spare, he told himself.
If the morning rush starts, he must also be fairly annoyed that I have not been seeing the grandson. Young parents think the world exists in order to take an interest in a newborn child, he reflected philosophically. When Balu was born, we cut off relations who didn't come and stand over the crib and say admiring things about him.
All the same, he had no business to upset me. I have not been feeling well. He should have had more sense. Share of the property.
The damned fool. The recollection of this made him so angry that he stopped and almost turned to go back home. What right has that fool to make me walk to him at this hour?
It is sheer nonsense. Why should I go there? He asked himself suddenly. Share of the property.
Accursed fool. What share? I gave him the right answer. He chuckled at the memory of his vulgar repartee.
Anyway, there is no other time when I can meet him and speak to him. Might as well get through it and see what ails him. I will make him a proposition to join me in business. That is the thing to do.
It is ages since I saw Brind nice girl. He came to Lawley Road. It was about 1 o'clock.
He stood before number 17, at 4th Cross Road, a small villa with a bluebell creeper over the gate post and a mesh-covered veranda. He stood outside and admired the house, got this practically for a song, less than 2,000 rupees. If that fool of a fellow could not pay the interest even after 2 years, the fault is not mine if it falls in my lap. The fruit can only fall on the palm of him who holds up his hands for it.
As he opened the little wooden gate and entered, he saw no light in the house. Probably the boy has slept, he reflected. He was hesitating whether to turn back and go. But the gate had creaked, a veranda light was now switched on and the bolt of the front door was being drawn back.
Who is there? Asked Brind's voice from inside. Margaya called out, Brind, to disclose himself. Brind had just risen from bed. She looked sleepy and rather tired.
She was a very elegant girl. Looking at her, Margaya thought, what a fortunate thing to have secured this daughter-in-law. If those fool astrologers had their way.
He climbed the steps. You have come walking at this hour, his daughter-in-law asked. Her voice was soft and musical. Margaya said, I couldn't find any other time.
How is the baby? He walked in and stood looking at the little fellow sleeping on his mother's bed. He gently touched his cheek.
The girl demurely said, he wouldn't sleep and gets up at the slightest sound. Why should you not let him stay awake? Asked Margaya. He gives us no peace.
He wants to be carried about all the time, she answered. She was showing him the utmost respect as an elder. He admired her for it, her tone of courtesy, her soft movement and elegance.
God bless her. He told himself. Yes, Balu used to be troublesome too when he was a baby.
Where is Balu? He asked, noticing the vacant bed beside hers. She hesitated ever so slightly before answering briefly, he has not yet come home. Her face became serious when she said that.
Where has he gone? Margaya asked. She still hesitated.
She merely bit her lips. Margaya sensed something was wrong. He persisted, and she merely replied, he has gone to a cinema, with an effort.
A cinema? So late as this? How can he leave you and the child alone and go away like this?
There was so much genuine sympathy in his voice that the girl was affected by it and burst into tears. Margaya was totally at a loss to know what to do now. This was a new situation for him, and he did not know what to say.
He said to her, why don't you sit down? Why do you keep standing? She wouldn't sit down out of respect for her father-in-law.
But he was able to persuade her. She rallied and said, I wanted to come and see you. Every day this happens, he comes home every day at 2 o'clock.
If I ask him, I'm afraid of him. And then it came out bit by bit. Dr. Pal was his constant companion.
They gathered in a house and played cards. It was the house of a man who called himself a theatrical agent. She had learned from their servant that there were a lot of girls also in the building. Pal had something or other to do with these people, and picked Balu up in his car.
They sat there continuously playing cards till midnight. They chewed tobacco and betel leaves, sometimes they drank also, and men and women were very free, and all of them dropped down wherever they sat and slept and became sick when they drank too much. It was a revolting description that she gave, all learned from the servant who worked in the house, the uncle of the girl who looked after the baby.
Brind also said that Balu seemed to be thinking of becoming a partner in their business. In fact, he always explained to his wife that it was business that kept him out late. If I speak, he threatens to drive me out.
It's that Pal. Can't you do something to keep him away? How long has this been going on? 4 months.
Why didn't you tell us? I was afraid. Even now, please don't tell him that I have said anything.
Margaya brooded over it darkly. He now seemed to understand why his son was asking for a partition. Drive Pal. Dr. Pal.
What shall I do with him? He reflected. He was torn between caution and an impossible rage.
God knew where it would lead if he alienated Pal's sympathies. The fellow might do anything. He decided, within a fraction of a moment, that the thing to do was to separate his son from Pal without making a fuss about it, and then deal with his son separately. He would have to tempt Pal to go out of town, probably on the pretext of a contact outside, but if he went there and Margaya found he was in terror of him.
The only element that kept people from being terrified of each other was trust. The moment it was lost, people became nightmares to each other. This seemed to be truly his problem, that he could neither keep the fellow in sight nor let him go out of sight. But anyway, he had better move with the utmost caution. The daughter-in-law patiently sat in a chair and watched his face.
He told her with a great deal of tenderness, you go in and sleep, my child. I will go home, and I will see about this tomorrow. Don't worry about anything.
I will set your husband right. You lock the door now. Look after the baby. Tell me if you need anything.
Don't be afraid. I will send your mother-in-law to see you tomorrow morning. He got up and left.
The girl bolted the veranda door and put out the light. As he was closing the wicket gate behind him, Dr. Pal's baby Austin drew up. The moment the rattling of its engine was heard, the veranda light was switched on again and the bolt was drawn with a pat.
At the same moment, Balu got down from the car. He leaned his elbow on the door and whispered something to Dr. Pal, at which Drive Pal burst into a laugh and giggling sounds emanated from the back seat of the car. They did not notice Margaya's presence.
Margaya could not restrain himself any longer. He was conscious of a desperation that impelled him on. All his caution and discretion was swept aside.
He dashed to the other door of the car near the driving seat, thrust his arm in, got Pal by the scruff of his coat and dragged him out as Balu on the other side was saying, "Good night." Nobody was prepared for it, and Drive Pal staggered out. The moment he was out of the car, Margaya took off one of his sandals and hit him with it. He kept hitting out with such tremendous power and frequency that Pal could hardly protect himself.
He was blinded by pain, and blood oozed from the cuts on his face. The girls within the car screamed, Balu came over and demanded, "What has come over you, father?" Margaya turned on him, put his fingers around his neck and gave him a push towards the gate with, "Get out of my way, you little idiot."
Balu staggered and hit his head on the gate post. His wife came down the veranda steps with the cry, "Oh, are you hurt? What has happened?"
He rushed towards her asking, "When did this father of mine come here?" Meanwhile, the child had been awakened by the hubbub and started howling, and Brind turned and ran back into the house. Balu followed her blindly in.
Meanwhile, the two girls in the back seat of the car cried out, "Help! Help!" Margaya put his head in and ordered, "Shut up, you horse."
He felt overpowered by the scent of powder filling the inside of the car. "Who are you?" he demanded.
They at once became silent, and his tone became more menacing. "Who are you?" he thundered. His voice woke up a couple of street dogs and they started barking, which again woke up Balu's child so that it shouted more than ever.
The girls said, "We belong to the theater." "The theater? Why don't you say what you really are?"
"If you are seen again anywhere." The rest they could not hear, because Drive Pal wriggled himself free, and suddenly dashed into the car, started it, and was off. He looked back and remarked, "You miserable miser, who cannot share your goods with your own son, all right."
The red rear light of the car receded and vanished around a bend. Margaya hesitated on the road for a moment to decide whether he should follow his son into the house. But he saw his son bolt the veranda door and put out the light.
Good. Good. It is a good sign.
"He is a good son that trembles and runs away from his father," he said to himself, and turned homeward. Later in life, Margaya often speculated what would have become of him if he had started back home after speaking to his daughter-in-law a little earlier and missed Drive Pal as Austin that night, or if he had remained in the shadows and had allowed Pal to go off after dropping Balu, whom he might probably have tackled with more circumspection and diplomacy. He might even have shared his property with him as he demanded. That would have saved him at least the rest of it, and prevented the doctor from doing what he did.
Dr. Pal went straight to a police station and recorded an immediate complaint of assault. The two actresses and Balu were his witnesses. Next morning he went round with plaster on his face to his various customers and businessmen.
His first visit was to the blanket merchant. He took Balu along with him in the car. The blanket merchant was the first to ask, "What has happened to your face, doctor?"
The doctor looked sad and said, "I am an academic man, and I should not have associated with businessmen." "Can't you tell me what happened?" the blanket merchant persisted.
The doctor just shook his head and said, "No, I can't, better leave things alone. It was my mistake to have associated with all sorts of folks, and I ought to blame only myself. I'm paying for it." "Don't say so, sir."
"We have the greatest respect for you. Business people have money, and they can help me to set up my psychological clinic. That was my chief interest. That would have been of the greatest benefit to them. Nowadays, psychological wear and tear has the highest incidence among businessmen. Theirs is a life of the utmost strain. I thought I might be of some help to the business community more than to anyone else, and what is the result?"
"No, sir, you must not speak like that. We have the greatest regard for you. But business life is becoming difficult with so many controls and permit forms to be filled up for all sorts of things.
You have no idea how many obstacles a businessman has to face before he can get through anything in the government." After this, the doctor drew his attention again to the plaster over his cheeks. The merchant asked, "You have not yet told me where you got it?"
Dr. Pal lowered his voice to a whisper and said, "You will not believe me. Margaya assaulted me last night near his son's house." "What?"
"Why? How can I say? He is somewhat queer these days."
His son went up to him with some request and was slapped in the face. Later, I had to see him. Things are probably not going smoothly there.
"Ah!" exclaimed the merchant. He was the first to meet Margaya at his house that morning. "I want to take back my deposit."
"There is a marriage proposal likely to shape out." He grinned awkwardly, nervously, and held out the receipt issued by Margaya. "My accountant has all the figures," began Margaya. The blanket merchant cringed. "It's urgent."
"I've to find immediate cash." "You have already drawn interest on it?" Yes. But I want the principal."
"Oh, Yes, certainly, said Margaya, and went into the small room and came out with a bundle of currency. You are a clever rogue. You have earned so much interest and are now getting your capital.
Very clever, Margaya said light-heartedly, which pleased the blanket merchant tremendously as he counted the cash and went out. This was the starting point. Margaya could not leave for his office.
One after another they came with their receipts. Margaya returned their cash without a murmur. The street became congested with people converging on his house, people hung about his steps and windows.
He bolted the front door and dealt with them through the window. Margaya's wife looked panic-stricken. What has happened? Why so many people?
They are wanting their money back, that's all. What are you going to do? Well, give it back, that's all.
You have not eaten this whole day. I have no taste for food. He felt very weak and still could not stomach the thought of food.
His eyes smarted with scrutinizing so many receipts. His wrist pained him with the counting of notes. He wished he could get his accountant by his side.
He saw him through the window, struggling to approach the house in the midst of the crowd. But he could not come nearer. Some persons recognized the accountant and turned upon him.
Margaya saw them manhandling the old man. I knew nothing about it. I swear.
I still know nothing about it, he was crying. My life savings gone. I am a beggar today.
One of them shouted into the ears of the old man. They were pulling him here and there. His spectacles were broken and his turban torn.
A policeman came into the crowd and took away the old man. By about 4 o'clock all the cash in the house was gone. All the mail sacks lay about empty and slack, yet peeping through the window, Margaya saw seas and seas of human heads stretching to the horizon, human faces at their most terrifying.
The babble of the crowd was deafening. Luckily for him, the front door of the house was at least a century old and made of thick timber, and could stand the battering by 100 hands. People jammed the passage and windows and shouted menacingly.
There seemed to be only one theme for all the cries: my money. My money gone. All my savings gone.
Margaya could sit up no longer. He just flung himself down on the floor beside the window. No air could come in.
There were terrifying faces all around and the babble of voices, and over it all came the cry of an ice cream peddler, ice cream. Ice cream for thirst. As his bell tinkled.
Margaya's wife was scared by the siege and at the condition of her husband. She bent over him and asked, What shall I do? Oh, what shall I do?
Call my brother, said Margaya. She ran to the backyard. Very soon Margaya's elder brother climbed the lavatory wall and the parapet of the well, jumped into the backyard and was in a minute by his side.
Brother, what is this? What has come over you? I'm tired. Please send for the police. Hurry up, otherwise they will mob this house, they will kill us, they will set it on fire, they will.
Do you still owe all of them money? To all of them and many more unseen, more will come tomorrow. More and more of them. Get me the police to save us now and bring a lawyer.
I am filing insolvency at once. Insolvency. Think of your family reputation.
No other way out, none whatever. The brother, ever a man for a crisis, stood thinking. The hubbub outside was increasing every moment.
The flood is outside, Margaya said. It will wipe us out. Please, please run. He felt too weak with his effort and lay still with his eyes closed.
His brother ran to his sister-in-law standing at the door sobbing. Quick, give him something. There is no milk in the house.
The milkman could not come in. There is nothing in the house. We have been shut up here since the morning.
Oh, is that so? He rushed away, and returned soon carrying a vessel full of coffee, and something to eat. He seemed to be enjoying the situation.
He said excitedly, Now, try and give him something. I tried to see if there was a regular meal next door, but it was not available. Your sister-in-law will send you food presently. She has just started cooking.
He bustled round spreading his utensils about. Give him something at once. I will go and get the police to guard us.
I will also get a lawyer. I will do everything to exempt this house at least from the schedule. This is inalienable property.
They cannot attach this. His talk was full of technicalities. He rushed off to the backyard and then on to his task.
The tide rolled back in about 3 or 4 months. Days of attending courts, lawyers, inventories, and so on and so forth. Margaya felt that he had lost all right to personal life.
He relaxed completely. He lay on a mat with his eyes closed, his wife in the kitchen. A jutka stopped outside, and in marched his son followed by his wife, carrying the infant on her arm.
The jutka man brought in a couple of trunks and beds and placed them in the hall. Margaya clutched the baby to his bosom. His daughter-in-law went into the kitchen.
Balu stood about uncertainly. Margaya did not speak to him for a long time. The boy stood in the passage undecided what he should do, his shirt unbuttoned at the throat.
A feeling of pity overcame Margaya. The boy had lost some of the look of confidence that he wore before, the radiance that shone on his face when there was money in the background. Money was like a gem which radiated subdued light all round.
The boy looked just dull and puzzled. Margaya kept looking at him so long that he felt he had to explain, so he just said, "I have come away. They have attached the house." "With the furniture and all the other things?"
Margaya asked. "I was expecting it. It was difficult to come out even with our clothes and Brind as jewelry."
They demanded a list. "I was expecting it. Come here, Baku."
Balu approached him and sat beside him. Margaya put his arm round him. "You see that box there? I have managed to get it out again."
He pointed to a corner where his old knobby trunk was kept. "Its contents are intact as I left them years ago, a pen and an ink bottle. You asked for my property.
There it is, take it, have an early meal tomorrow and go to the banyan tree in front of the Co-operative Bank. I hope the tree is still there. Go there, that is all I can say, and anything may happen thereafter."
"Well, what do you say? I am showing you a way. Will you follow it?"
The boy stood ruminating. He was looking crushed. "How can I go and sit there? What will people think?"
"Very well then, if you are not going, I am going on with it, as soon as I am able to leave this bed," said Margaya. "Now get the youngster here. I will play with him."
Life has been too dull without him in this house.